You'll start by cutting yourself a long strip of blue vinyl, 2 inches wide and long enough to go around your waist. And then you're just going to take your hot glue gun, put a little bit of hot glue on the edges, and just fold over about 1/4 of an inch. You're just going to do that to both of the long edges all the way down. And so here it is with both edges glued. So then you're going to cut the skirt pieces out of blue vinyl, and these are pretty simple shapes to cut. Basically they're just long rectangles, and the middle one has a point on the bottom and the other 4 have angles. And you'll want to kind of measure it as you're cutting so that you make the middle strip as long as you want it to be on the skirt, and then the other one's just a little bit shorter as they go back, and they'll also be a little bit less wide, with the middle one being about 3 inches wide. So then you're just going to add a metal star stud to the center of each of the strips. You're just going to push it through the vinyl and then carefully bend the feet down on the back side. Then you'll just do the same thing to make 5 more strips of vinyl with star studs to use as the back side of the skirt. Next you'll go back to your long thin strip of blue vinyl, and you're going to find the very center of it and take one of your pointed skirt sections and punch a hole through both layers of the vinyl. Then you'll just insert a scrapbooking brad through both layers and spread out the feet on the back side. Then do the same thing to put a second scrapbooking brad in that section of the skirt. You do that with all the pieces of the skirt, front and back, making sure that each piece gets 2 scrapbooking brads. You want to make sure that the back pieces align exactly with the front. So once you've got all the scrapbooking brads in, you'll just sew a snap onto each end of the blue vinyl. You can just bring that around and snap the 2 ends together. So then you'll probably find that you have a gap of a few inches on either side of the skirt, between the front and the back sections. So to fill that gap, you'll cut a bunch of little tombstone-shaped pieces out of some Pellon. Then you'll hot glue each piece to some of the same silver shiny material that you used in the previous tutorials. Then you'll cut around each piece from the silver material, leaving just a hair of an outround. Then you'll just take a piece of Pellon a little wider than the gap in the skirt and hot glue all those little pieces onto that piece of Pellon, making sure that each layer overlaps the one below it. Then just unfold the brads on either side of the gap in the skirt, push the top of the piece of Pellon against them so that you get the indentations, and then poke those holes all the way through. Slide them back over the brads and spread out the tails. So then I found a cheap imitation leather jacket in a secondhand shop, and I used that to cut my corset pattern pieces out of. And you can use pretty much whatever your favorite corset pattern is, but if you want to use the one that I used here, you can get it for $1 at the woodlandelf.com/pattern/warrior corset. And so what I did was fold the jacket in half, lay the edge of the corset pattern on the fold, and then cut out both layers. And normally you'd have to cut out a piece of liner, but because I cut this out of an old coat, there was already a liner in it, and I just cut that out with the pattern. And also because this was a coat, there are some seam lines that are already in it, but I thought they looked kind of cool, so I didn't bother trying to avoid them. Then I cut out the 2 back pieces of the corset pattern, again with the matching liner. And these pieces are included in the pattern, I just didn't show them in the video. So then you'll sew the shorter side of each of the back pieces to the sides of the front part of the corset. You do that by just flipping the pieces over so that the leather sides are on the inside and the liner sides are out. And then you just sew down the sidelines. And the center of the back you just leave open. And so once the pieces are sewn together, when you unfold it, you should have this. Then I cut 2 top cups and 2 bottom cups with matching liners out of the coat. Then you just lay the top cup over the bottom cup so that the leather sides are together and the lining sides are out, and then you just sew along the flatter line. And you should end up with this. So then you're going to need to sew the cups to the holes in the front of the corset. And you do that by flipping the cup over the wrong way so that the leather sides touch. And you want to make sure that your center seam on your cup starts at the center ridge in the front of the corset. And then you'll just sew all the way around the curve. When you flip it right side out, you should have this. So next is time to hem. And you're going to do that by folding in the layer of liner and folding the layer of leather over that, which will keep the liner from unraveling and the leather just won't unravel. And you'll do that around the outside edge of the entire corset. So here's the corset once it's all been hemmed. And here's what the outside looks like. So then laying the corset inside up, you're just going to fold over each side of the corset about 1.5 inches on the top and about 3/4 of an inch on the bottom. And then you just want to tape that fold in place. So then take your hole maker and drill a hole through both layers of the fold. Then use a pair of scissors or an X-Acto knife to enlarge the hole. Then you'll take a metal eyelet and push it through both layers of the hole. Next, lay down a hard piece of wood, and using the tool that came with the eyelets, you're just going to pound those down to hold them in place on the leather. And then you'll just continue putting eyelets a little more than 1 inch apart all the way down both sides of the corset. So then when you fold the 2 ends of the corset together, the eyelets will match up with each other, and then you can just use a piece of red lacing to close the corset back. And then you'll just tie the laces off at the top to hold them in place. So then you're going to want to get yourself some plastic boning, and usually it comes fabric covered, so you can just sew along the fabric to sew it to the corset, but if not, just get yourself another piece of fabric and sew a channel to slide the boning into. So you're going to want to place the boning right next to the eyelet holes. You're going to want to put a piece along the seam where you sewed the back part to the front part of the corset, and then a third piece about 2 inches to the inside of that. And the reason my corset is finished here is because I forgot to put the boning in at this point, so I had to go back and put it in after I'd already finished the rest of the corset, but you'll want to put it in at this point before you do the rest of the corset because it makes it a lot easier. And so you can see the inside of the corset where the 3 pieces of boning have been attached. And so here's what it looks like from the outside. You can see the double seam lines are the boning channels. So then you're going to get yourself some brown distressed material. I found mine in Joann Fabrics. Then you're going to cut out 8 rectangles, each about 2 inches high and 3 inches long. And you don't really have to be exact with the measurements. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take each square and fold under the edges about 1/4 of an inch, and then where the corners meet, you're just going to drill a hole and push a scrapbooking brad through it, but you won't fold open the feet yet. You'll do that to each of the 4 corners on all 8 of the rectangles. So then you'll cut yourself another rectangle the same height but 1 inch longer than the other 8. You're going to lay them out in this pattern on the front of the corset, with the longest one being at the top center. So then you'll take your hole maker and you're just going to poke holes through the front of the corset where the scrapbooking brads will go through, and then you're just going to push the scrapbooking brads through those holes. And to do the same thing to all 4 of the brads, making the hole and then pushing the brad through the leather of the corset. And then once you have the brads pushed through the holes, you'll just spread the tails out on the back side. And so here it is with all the brown pieces on it. So next you're going to add the eagle to the corset, and you want to make sure that it's situated just above the center seams and the cups on the corset. So once you've got the eagle placed, you're just going to unfold all the brads that are touching the actual corset part. You're going to push down on them to get an indentation, and then you're just going to drill a hole where that indentation is. And then you'll just push the brad through that hole and spread the tails out on the underside. You're going to do that with all the brads that are touching the corset. And so here it is once all the bottom brads of the eagle have been attached to the corset. Now for the lasso, I just got a piece of gold cord trim from Joann Fabric, and so you'll need to make a lasso holder on the side of the corset. So you're going to take a thin piece of red leather and sew the ends of it right over the corset's side seam. Then you'll just cut the center of the loop in half and sew a snap to each end of it, and that way you'll just be able to snap it together and unsnap it in order to hold the whip on. And so here's the completed costume.